To the bigger one that's kind of come up in the last kind of week or less. I think everyone's seen, and I know some pictures have gotten around, have been around about some work that was happening down in front of 79 Baxter Road on the old court terraces there. I know the Coastal Conservancy and Burton sent some photos in, and we've been working on that. Uh, and there's been a little bit of a kind of a change in what's happened there. So our recommendation is going to be a little interesting on this. And was speaking to the folks at DEP about it today, and kind of running through our options. And this is kind of a path that we set on after talking to them, and they agreed that this was probably the smartest thing to do. There's obviously some concerns that there was some work that's visible below what the rack line is. And the rack line isn't necessarily indicative of where high water is, but in situations where it's that close, I think everyone felt that prudently high water should have been staked and marked so people knew not to cross it without knowing where it is. And, anecdotal evidence be what it may, there's clearly water that flows up to the bottom of that on a regular enough basis to put the rack line kind of landward of the seaward edge of those core bags to deal with it. So after talking to them, I think they felt that probably issuing out an enforcement action was probably the best idea, and issuing out an enforcement action against SE 48 1602, and I'll get the number wrong. It's 1657 is the other one. And instead of doing what we normally do and where we just issue to the applicant, I think given the problems that we've had in the past and the varying response, and after talking to them, I think we feel that it's important in this case to issue to both the permit holder. So the permit holder and both of those permits is the Wisconsin Beach Preservation Fund, to issue a separate one to the property owner, which is the town of Nantucket, and to issue a separate one from even those two to 79 Baxter Road, who is benefiting from the protection of that structure, to ensure that someone responds. So that all being said, and that's our recommendation at the end, we also tried to reach out to Netco and came to find out today, one of the reasons we've been having trouble is Netco is no longer Netco. Netco was purchased by a larger company, and a lot of their contact information and things have changed. They've been absorbed by a company called, I say it wrong, it's either Sumco or Semco, and some of the personnel and folks that supervise that have changed. I know Mr. Lager, who had been with Netco, has moved over to that company as well. I tried to reach out to their kind of regional supervisor for Nantucket to talk about the problem that's there, and just in waiting to hear back from them. I kind of got through that process later in the day and then was running up against executive session. So I just kind of left a message and told them I try to connect with them tomorrow to get them up to speed. So that's kind of where we are with all of that. So again, I think our recommendation is to issue that out. And one of those three parties is the property owner, the previous applicant and permit holder, or the property owner who we've been told is responsible for doing the work by the applicant in that case. One of them is responsible, and we will get whoever that is in front of us to answer for what seems to be a pretty clear violation, and to set forward a path to rectify it. DEP has kind of explained to us that they would recommend trying to find a way to either close out that old permit if there's not a certificate of compliance in some way, or putting together some sort of conditions for work through the enforcement to try to update that order of conditions to some degree. So I think those were good suggestions from those folks. So, and it's nice that they think that that's okay to do, because that hasn't always been the case, but I think that's helpful. So I think that's our kind of plan of attack on this, and I'm happy to answer any questions, and we'll go from there.
Thank you, Jeff. It looks like Ian has some questions, and then Seth.
Yes. So, the fact is it's impassable when the tide's in, and you have to, you have to hike yourself up onto onto the car backs to get around. So at what point do we say remove them, or remove enough of them so that there's public access, between low and high tide?
So I actually asked that specific question to the folks at DEP today because I don't think that it's not an uncommon issue to do that. So I think the question of what happens when a peninsula starts to form and how you deal with that, hopefully we'll get some guidance from them. But I think when we bring them in front to do that, we will hopefully be able to create a strategy to do exactly what you're saying, Ian.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you, Jeff. Joe?
I feel like this core role is starting to starve the rest of the system, where I think, and I'm going to be the bad guy, but I feel like SBF is still dumping sand over. But this, if anyone site is going to have a negative impact along this area, this is going to be the site. It's not providing any sand to the littoral system. So I really think that if someone's going to bring a lawsuit, I would go to that direction. I just really feel like Netco or whoever they are now has been dragging their feet, and this is going to be problematic later on because they just haven't been doing what their application says. And I think it's going to be a big issue later on or now. Thank you.
And may I, Madam Chair, just reaffirm what Joseph is saying, that when I was out there a couple of months ago or last month during the storms, it was really noticeable, the dip in the beach around there as the tide went out. So there was clearly a deficit there. Anecdotal, I understand, Jeff, but
No, but that's so all of those things stack up, right? So when we have that conversation about it, people are seeing adverse impacts. That's exactly what it's supposed to do. I mean, I think if that project had been permitted under a current order of conditions, our review would be very different. So I did forget to add in our recommendation for that enforcement would also include the cease and desist. And if necessary, we can provide that cease and desist to those folks in person if they're there working. So we can make that happen pretty effectively.
Thank you, Jeff. Seth?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just thinking logistically, it's my understanding that both these orders are expired, right?
Correct.
Yeah, so I mean, hopefully one of those three parties responds and comes before us, but if the project is sufficiently out of compliance, an expired order that's unlikely to be able to put back into compliance and therefore receive a certificate of compliance, is it possible to either, have a removal order to void the permit? I guess you can't void an expired permit, or to somehow compel them to bring a new order of conditions to deal with these issues?
The easy answer to that is yes. So I think in the process when you come in is you can say that they need to address the sand and working issues and fix the violation. And if it's not something that can be brought into compliance enough to receive a certificate of compliance for, then they will need to file a new notice to do the work to bring it into compliance. Or you order it through the enforcement action and say, this is what needs to be done. And you simply just condition it as such. And if they can't, then I think you can have grounds to take alternative steps to either modify what's there or take more drastic action as well. So I think that gives some options. But I think when we get to the point where we're talking about something of that extreme, is I will make sure that George is with us to make sure that we are doing it in the correct and proper manner.
Thank you, Jeff. Joe?
Thank you. Through the chair to Jeff. Would this be something Greg Berman should be looking at, where he's looking at SPPF's reports? Is this something over time where they haven't been putting the 5,000 cubic yards over the bank? Is that something he should be writing a report, and what impacts that would have?
Yes, I think the difficulty, and this is kind of the frustration with this whole stretch of project, is the conditions that were written, the requirements for reporting and monitoring are vastly different. I know that the amounts there, and the other problem, having gone through it now a little bit, is the permitted area is much bigger than just 79 Baxter Road. So the amount of nourishment that was going on is kind of across a greater area. And I think we'd have to back figure to what was supposed to be going on 79, specifically to deal with that lot in specific. And the other problem that remains with a lot of this too is it's also not currently licensed by the town because that license is also expired. So the town also hasn't done enough due diligence to make sure that it's meeting the conditions of the license that expired in like 2010. So it's just, it's a big mess. And I think issuing these out is a step towards trying to clean them up. And then between all of us here, I'm also hopeful that as we go through the other resiliency look at Baxter Road, is there maybe a better long-term plan that comes out for this area that even could be, you know, moving houses or relocating roads or dealing with it, that provides an end to all of these structures at some point too. So hopefully that kind of comes to pass.
Go ahead, Joe.
To you, Madam Chair, do you think that this is a letter we should write to the select board and say this is another violation on that same street that just they're not taking us seriously, or the town, that they're causing major impacts?
Yeah, so in this case, we're sending an enforcement to the town. So they'll get the message, I think. I don't know that they need another letter, Jeff.
So just to let everyone know, when we send out an enforcement order, right, there's the slick little DEP form that you guys sign, is we always send a letter kind of from the staff level that explains what people are getting. Because a lot of times people get that form and it's hard to follow when they don't understand. So a lot of times we'll also send just a little bit of a cover letter that says you're receiving this enforcement action because on said date, and we'll include we include photos, we include any mapping that we have, just so people can see kind of what it was based on. And, you know, when something that says, you know, at the March 11th, 2021 Conservation Commission meeting, the commission voted to issue out this enforcement action for the following reasons, and give them a little bit more detail, and then, and then make sure that they also have our contact information. So when they get it and they want to yell and scream at somebody, they know where to call. And then we can kind of get them in to say, all right, so we want you to be at the 325 meeting, or when they get it to say, we want you to be at the, you know, the first meeting in April. This is what's going to be expected of you. This is what's going to go on. This is the information you need to provide in advance. And this is being provided by, and go from there. So that's, they don't still get it cold.
All right. One last question, and I apologize. Does it make sense for us to issue a letter to the town select board and then follow up and attend the Zoom meeting to have it discussed, or really bring it to the forefront? Because I think it's in their inbox, but it's not really discussed. And I think if we could bring it to the public forum, because I think a lot of people are sitting at home nowadays watching on YouTube, watching the select board meetings, and I think this would be a really important piece to bring it forward and put some light on it. Or if the Inky is watching, I think that they should also be reporting on some of these stories that kind of expand their story, SPPF, but what else is going on? We got 117 Baxter Road, we have, you know, this property, and, you know, Netco, and whoever they're called now. But I think there's a larger problem that's going on that I really think that we should shed some more light on if we could, or some way, shape, or form.
Totally. So I think to do that, if you guys were going to go, obviously, if you all attend a meeting, there's some shenanigans. If you designated someone to do that, if they wanted to talk about it at the meeting, if it was scheduled, I think if you guys picked a person to go, that would probably be the easiest way for them to, a member of the commission, to represent the commission in front of the select board about whatever we're going to send. And you guys can wrestle it out for whoever that's going to be. So I'll leave that up to you guys. Or you can have like a bike off, whatever you want. So
Sounds like Joe wants to do it.
Squeaky
Well,
toy
whenever I
competition.
go, he stopped on his bike. I see you
It would
at
have to be a handicapped bike off, I can tell you that right now. But it's sort of a chicken and egg situation, isn't it? In other words, shouldn't have the owner of 79 Baxter Road have gone to the town as well? Or is there a separation there? Could you explain that to me, Jeff? I'm being slow on the uptake here, I guess.
yeah, so kind of what's happened, and this is how I understand it. So someone may come along that 100% contradicts what I'm about to say, but from our recent discussions and kind of going through it, the permits that were gotten in the kind of the middle 2000s, right, for these core, the time they called them core terraces and a little bit of core logs. So they came in and got the permits, and they were permits for an area based upon the addresses on Baxter Road. So kind of how we still do it, where, like the geotubes are from, 83 to 109 or wherever they are. And these were done this way. And those permits were gotten by SPPF at the time. And it was on town land, and they got a license to use it. And then what happened as far as management goes is it seems like they turned over the management to the individual property owners that lived along Baxter Road and said, you guys are responsible for scheduling your individual maintenance on your individual lot. And the license ran with the whole host of everything. And in the interim, some folks decided not to put anything in. Some people installed and have it in varying states. Some really actively maintained. I think 79 is probably the biggest piece where it's clearly been actively maintained the most and the longest of the whole stretch. And in the interim, properties change hands and things happen, is the license expired. And unfortunately, it's not something where they got a letter that says, from the town, that says, hey, your license is going to expire, or they weren't, no one had put on the calendar, hey, in 2010, our license expires, we need to get back on top of it, and we need to get relicensed. And then it kind of disappeared into the abyss of, rock revetments and things that were being proposed for kind of that longer stretch and getting rolled in, and, everything's going to get relicensed if this gets approved. And a lot of these things happen, and, from both sides, both the town and from the homeowners to SPDF sides, I think people just got lax and stopped paying attention to it as much as it needed to be paid attention to. And I'm not going to make excuses for anyone. No one involved did their job to the best that they should have been doing it. So that's kind of where we are with a lot of these that are, there's no active license. The permits are expired. We've been doing maintenance, and it's been covered up by the mask of the larger, more obvious project, and the project that's been discussed more lately and what's been going on. And for better or for worse, it's fallen into a state where it shouldn't be.
Through you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Jeff, for sort of fleshing that out. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yeah, and Jeff, I have a question along the lines of what you just said. So can the commission's role in open space, I can't stop it. It's either attack me or the speaker. Can the commission's role in open space have an impact on like the town licensing land for structures? Like, can we have a role in that decision-making through that legislation?
I think that's a really good question, and I don't know the answer to that. I'd have to look into that a little bit and probably get some answer from council a little bit. I know the ability for town-owned land to be, sold or used by a private entity. The authority for that use lies kind of twofold in some cases. It either lies within town meeting or it lies within the Board of Selectmen, depending upon what the use is going to be. Traditionally here, and kind of I think how it's been, leasing use for land that's town owned for private use has been something that's been done through the select board. I also know that there's a bylaw on the books for the town now that the leasing or use of land and town owned property for this very specific purpose requires authorization from town meeting to do. So I don't know how that plays into a structure that was, it'd be weird to say, a structure that was constructed under a license before that bylaw was enacted. I am not the person to answer that question if that bylaw would now apply to relicensing that structure. That is definitely for our learned counsel to answer more clearly, because that isn't both my pay grade question. So that's kind of the long and the short of it.
Jeff. Seth?
Thank you. So obviously there's our jurisdiction, the wetlands regulations that these entities are out of compliance with, but it also sounds like they're out of compliance with the town's licensing procedure, but that's not really our jurisdiction. Does the town know that they're out of compliance? Will this letter be telling them that they're out of compliance? And is there any way to influence the town into taking up or compel them into taking up their own hearing about the lack of compliance on the licensing side of things?
So, in a really interesting twist, and hopefully I won't get yelled at this for tomorrow, but it would be interesting to see, and I think we'd have to do some checking, is if through the enforcement process, is if the thing you could ask the town to do would be to relicense it or to have that discussion. That I think you could probably do, but to reaffirm their authorization of use of the town-owned property for this project is essentially, I think, what she would do, is to affirm that it may be used. And I think that would compel them to probably have to get an active license. And that's a simple question to ask. Say is, are you guys still allowing this use on the town-owned property? And if they say, well, we have an expired license, then say, well, is that a yes or is that a no? And then it kind of puts it to them. So I think that's a fair question to ask. I do believe that they are aware that that license is not currently active at this point.
And
Yeah.
the Board of Selectmen issues a license, Jeff?
Yes, sir.
And I agree with Jeff. I think the town is definitely aware, both the Board of Selectmen and town management, that there are unlicensed structures for their licensing. So they know.
And to be fair, not just to the core terraces in this case, is, we've been chasing, and I know Rick Atherton especially, he and I have talked about it more times than I like to remember. There are a number of sets of even like stairs down the coastal bank that aren't licensed, that are on town-owned land technically. So there's a lot of issues, and it's not just exclusive to Sconset in some cases, but this is the most obvious one where, people were doing, and I'll even say back in the good old days where, I can tell you specifically, I permitted a set of stairs at 67 Baxter Road that crossed town-owned property. And I came into the commission and got an order of conditions for those stairs. And I don't even think we asked the town for permission. It just did it. And that's just, you weren't doing it at the time, right? It wasn't totally uncommon to do. And it's just, it's a different time. And I think people have learned that that's something that should have been going on. So there's, lessons learned over a long time.
Thank you. Oh, Joe?
But does that go back to the stair we were talking about tonight, that Jeff Blackwell's application? Does that fall into that?
No, that's the town-owned property ends well before that.
Okay, that's just making sure.
No, and we're pretty good about asking about that now for sections of Baxter Road. So, again, that was something that used to happen more. You don't see it as much now. That the watchful eye of everyone watching Baxter Road and parcel 49.9 and parcel 48.8, I think, is much more watchful than what it used to be.
But this is where I think getting on the select board's agenda is really important, because it sheds light to, they have to have a conversation about it in front of the public.
I would not
I'll
disagree.
brace anyone to go to the meeting.
Yeah, I'd be happy to go to the meeting and raise this publicly again to them. I don't honestly have confidence it'll make any difference on their path out there. I just think they have other things that they're dealing with that do not involve wetlands, unfortunately. And I don't know how much pestering we would need to do to change that. But I'm not confident we're the ones who can pester them to change direction, unfortunately. But again, that's just a lot of recent perspective, I think. Maureen, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I really agree with what Joe has been saying. And while, it's not like they're all going to, cringe at the sight of you, even with all the rest of us standing behind you holding signs. I mean, they're not going to collapse and decide that something has to be done. But I think if we're very specific about and putting on the public record things like the fact that the license has expired, eons ago. And these things, this needs to be taken care of, and this needs to be taken care of, and this needs to be taken care of. And so that if there's a kind of a menu of the things that are hanging fire that really impact what's going on going forward, and we've got people in violation, and there's so many different things that if we just kind of laid it out, it's the kind of thing that maybe the Inky might pick up on. I mean, it could get people's attention more, beyond. And the select board, they certainly do care about what the townspeople think. So it's more, I'd say we'd be speaking more to the townspeople, perhaps than the select board per se. But I think I personally would think it's the place to do it. But we need to put together kind of a kind of very concise list of things. So, but I really like your idea, Joe.
Well, how about I'll draft up that list. We won't slow down on issuing out the EOs, but I'll put together that list for everyone, and we'll add it as an agenda item on our next agenda to review the letter and timeline to issue.
Great.
Joe?
And what about the fines? Why we're talking about this? Is this another time can we finalize the fines? Is that something we can do, or?
I think that's up for one of the meeting dates we have nailed down to try and deal with regulations and fines.
I think that's one of the meetings, the extra meetings that we were able to schedule towards the end of March. But yes.
Thank you.
So Jeff, before we move on too far, you need us to make a motion to issue those enforcements, correct?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, is there seconded by Joe? So by roll vote, Beal,
Aye.
Engelborg,
Aye.
Erisman, I, Golding,
Aye.
LaFleur,
Aye.
Phillips,
Aye.
Topham.
Aye.
All right, that carries unanimously. Wanted to make sure to get that done. And then it sounds like Jeff will work to try and get a letter